Welcome to Verbal Pick Radio, where we give you a verbal image of life, and we are everyday people. Like to welcome you all to the show. Look, we want to get into a topic. Now, we know the country's community and the Moors take on the identity of melanated people, i.e., blacks in America. I like to go down the line of Aswad and ebony colored, copper colored people in the Americas, right? We know the history of our ancestors who fought in Spain and lost that battle in Grenada and had to come to the Americas. Some came to the Americas. Some, as I stated, went to Africa, and just really different places around the globe. Some went back to North Africa. That's why you have a Lagos, Spain, and a Lagos, Nigeria, right? But we understand that aspect of our identity, right? But then we want to get into the thinking of those who are not on the side of calling us Moors and their take on the identity, and maybe we can have a dialogue and we can find somewhere in the middle, right? But that's the basis of this show, right? Now, this is something that was written by Walter Mitchell Jr., right? Afro or African American, right? He states, who are we? What's the difference? And why should it matter what we're called, right? Now, he's going to give his take on his research on the identity of melanated people in the Americas, right? Although we are members of the same race and share the burdens that come with that distinction, the interests of Africans that migrate to America, i.e. African Americans, are more closely aligned to the interests of Mexican immigrants, which conflict with the interests of Afro Americans. As Afro-Americans, our interests appear to be more closely aligned to Puerto Ricans of similar social stigmas, with whom we get along much better than with Africans living in America. I know how that sounds, but I'm not Rod Serling, and you have not entered the Twilight Zone. If you don't know who you are, you can't possibly know what your interests are. And if you don't know what your interests are, it's impossible to properly distinguish the difference between friend or foe. Sun Tzu wrote in The Art of War, if you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will suffer defeat. We have fought the good fight at every call. The presidential election of 2012 being the latest, and also going to the terms of Obama, and now we're up on the present presidential election, and man, I just wanted it's another fight, is what I'm saying, between Biden and Trump. Biden has his gaffes and his record of locking up black people. So does Kamala Harris as well. Then Trump has his issues with racism and not allowing black tenants in their apartment buildings that they own. So it's a lot going into the 2020 election as well. I just want to add that, though. We put more black faces in high places than Dr. King could have imagined. Guess we've reached the mountaintop, huh? If you guess yes, guess again. Right? After our ancestors were dispersed abroad from the shores of Africa in chains to be sold as slaves across the globe. Remember, that's a key word, the globe, right? All over the planet. Those that survived the Middle Passage were forcibly stripped of all their culture and compelled through the generations that followed to adopt the culture of their captives, meaning that we took on the identity, the culture, the dress, the style, the mindset of the slave master. This much and more were already known, right? So that being the case, it's reasonably to assume that succeeding generations of the descendants of this unfortunate lot will be the result of merging cultures, Africans and Americans, Africans and Portuguese, Africans and Australians, Africans and Brazilians, Africans and Colombians, Africans and Cubans. The human product of the Atlantic slave trade, the stepchildren of the world, being native to neither but recognizing both. Bam, wait a minute. I'm going to continue reading, but the only point where I disagree is that who do you allege that the native people in these places were? They were people of melanin. The melanated man populated from Brazil to Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Taino tribe, all over. And when the Europeans came and mixed their bloods, they didn't become the dominant people in those regions due to lineage or DNA. They became the dominant because they had the guns. So I disagree with that. The human product of the Atlantic slave trade, the stepchildren of the world, being native to neither but recognizing both. Blacks in America chose the term African American, but now across the globe, the dispersed relatives of their African ancestors chose the term Afro-Cubans, Afro-Brazilians, Afro-Swedes, Afro-Australians, Afro-Colombia, etc. By choosing the more appropriate Afro prefix, they acknowledge the connection to their enslaved ancestors and their current nationalities. Why this has eluded us here in America is a mystery to me. And basically he's saying, why are we not Afro, whatever tribe that was native in the Americas? But hell, they worked on us. We don't know the native tribes that we mixed in with here, or the native tribes that we were and didn't mix with. Where we don't know, and a lot of people are doing the research, but we don't know if we Afro Cherokee, Afro Blackfoot, Afro Seminoles. But some more study needs to be done on that. Now, why is this important? Because it encapsulates the history of our kind from chattel to champions and all the ugliness in between, while positively identifying who we really are. By using the prefix African rather than Afro, we not only isolate ourselves from the rest of our kind, we also mistakenly align ourselves with others of dissimilar interests, when in truth our natural allies would be the dispersed who share with us that common history. Right now we align ourselves through the machinations of black democratic leadership with minorities here in America. That's true. That includes Africans, Mexicans, Dominicans, Hindus, Asians, women, illegal immigrants. He put gay and lesbian groups, illegal immigrants, etc. Most of whom, including the Africans, are all too willing to disassociate themselves from us without provocation or hesitancy. all of whom having interests that conflict with ours at varying points to varying degrees, which means in fighting the battle of the minorities, we are working against our own best interests more times than not, leaving us too heavily invested in other people's battles and thinking we are defending our interests. True. Affirmative action, it is said that the group that benefits most from affirmative action is white women. If that's the case, why are we rallying into a frenzy every time it's threatened? This is not our battle. That's true, just like black women jumped in that women's rights movement and it wasn't our battle, it wasn't your battle because black men was not getting in your way or trying to stop you from accomplishing nothing. Immigration before the mass migration of millions of Mexican immigrants, Afro-Americans were the minority, which afforded us a little more political clout. After the mass migration, we no longer enjoy that title nor the clout that came with it. Before the mass migration, that included Africans, Asians, and others. Cook County Hospital was able to offer more services to the poor and needy in our community. Since the mass migration, a lot of those services have been cut and more cuts are coming as most of the immigrants are unable to pay for the services they receive and the system can't bear it. This is not our battle and it conflicts with our own interests. I just talked about women's rights, but he wrote about it. He says women's rights, among other things, that made partners competitors in the home and at work, fought for special attention being afforded to girls in schools, which has left our Afro-American sons neglected and falling too far behind. This is not our battle, and it conflicts with our own interests. There are many, many, many more ways in fighting the battle of the minorities. We have injured our own causes. Sun Tzu also wrote in the Art of War, if you do not know your enemies nor yourself, you will be imperiled in every single battle. As I stated above, the only way to properly distinguish between friend or foe is to follow your own interests at all times, not the party nor the politician. This does not mean refusing to compromise, but if there's going to be a compromise, it has to be mutually beneficial to the interests of both parties. Now, let me start right there. Keep going. Oh, that's an actual fact, man. Build your interests, man. Find out what your interests are, and then you work to grow, multiply your interests so you can have peace on this earth. It's like one person's taste is not your taste. One person's mission or goal is not your mission. It's not your mission or goal. You have to find out what is your mission, what is your goal, what is your cause, because we all don't share the same talents. We should learn how to enjoy each other's talents and feed from that or build from that. You know, not at the okay. So we'll go back. Okay, it has to be mutually beneficial to the interests of both parties, not at the expense of the one over the other, which seems to be the modus operandi of the black influence peddlers that broker these agreements in favor of others at the expense of Afro-Americans. The interests of Afro-Americans matter and are tied interchangeably to the interests of Afro-Cubans, Afro-Australians, Afro-Colombians, Afro-Brazilians, Afro-Swedes, etc. Although we may be a minority here, as Ali Musri said in his PBS series, the Africans, the sun never sets on the sons and daughters of the Atlantic slave trade. Look, excellent. So basically what he's saying is, if you're on this whole coast of America, don't break it down in tribes. Just call yourself Afro-Americans. versus African Americans. Interesting. Very interesting. I don't know. You gotta try it on and see how does it fit, because you're right. There's Afro Latinos, Afro Cubans. We are Afro Americans. Okay, he said if you saying that you are an African American when you haven't created a unity, economic base or business with the Africans that migrated to the Americas, then how can you call yourself an African American? He's saying the prefix Afro denotes melanin, and that shares a bond. That's the glue, the common denominator that we all can stand on. Very interesting, very interesting. On that note, we are evolving. What our ancestors saw in their particular time that they were living in, and decisions that had to be made in that particular time, right, is a lot different than what we have to do. You know, a lot different. Different mindsets, different roles that was played. It is what it is. We're going to get into a little bit more because we're not through yet. Because I'm trying to set a stage for a proper thinking in terms of the past, right? So you can kind of get a visual. As a matter of fact, Antebellum would be a visual to watch, and also this Lovecraft, which is airing on HBO Max. Check that out. But what I am saying is, in the environment in which our ancestors lived, right? Think about it. You had slave master raping the African slave, creating a union from that, and then turning their back on the child, right? Okay. Just keep that picture in mind, right? Then you had wars. War with the Brits that's coming. War with the Spanish. War with the French. And black people fought on all sides of the war. Every war in America that was ever fought, you best believe there was somebody black on both sides fighting. Somebody black on the opposite side fight. For what? For their interest. What was their interest? Some was fighting, to save money, to free their family, to get the hell out of a torrent or a ratchet condition, right? And so some today would look back and say, damn, man, I can't believe you fought on the Confederate side against your own people, right? But then they'll say, man, do you know the condition I was living in back then? Man, they was paying. I took that money, I survived and got my family. We got the hell out of there. That's life. They may say, well, why'd you fight for the Spanish and not for the American side? Look, the Spanish side was offering me freedom and teaching me another language. I'm rolling with the Spanish side, and I'm out of here. Now, on that note, I do want to say this. When the Spanish came to the Americas, right, back in the 1700s, right? I want to find it, but anyway, when the Spanish came to the Americas back in the 1700s, the Spanish recognized the Moors. The Spanish recognized the blacks because the blacks were really, they had left coming to the Americas, Spain, about 200 years prior. They knew the history. They recognized each other. So the Spanish hired the blacks in the Americas in their army and used them to fight. We won't get into a little bit of it. We're going to start, oh man, I'm going to start here and read. Because I found something interesting, but okay, we'll start right here. Now, anytime you hear they, right? Anytime you hear they, that's racist white supremacists, right? Okay, let's go. They limited the political rights of free blacks, but they allowed them to travel freely, organize their own institutions, publish newspapers, and petition and protest. Black men and women transformed these liberties into a powerful association and political traditions. African churches, school fraternities, organizations, and literary societies flourished in the northern states. The African Methodist Episcopal and African Methodist Episcopal Zion denominations and the Prince Hall Masons. The Grand United Order of Odd Fellows and the Knights of Pythias, Pythis, were among the largest of these, extending their reach to all portions of the North. Now, these were black organizations. Every black community also supported a host of locally based institutions and organizations. Members of these institutions, national and local, joined together to hold regional and national conventions that protested discrimination and worked for group improvement. From Richard Allen to Frederick Douglass, the black leaders forged a tradition of protest that demanded full equality. Right, as in the North, the free blacks populated in the Upper South was largely a product of the American Revolution, but in the region, the ideas and events along with the economic changes of the Revolutionary era merely loosened the fabric of slavery by increasing manumission, self-purchase, and successfully suits for freedom. Manumission was when the slave owner would put in the will to have the slaves free. What they do in manumission. Slavery survived the challenge of the Revolutionary years and indeed flourished. Nevertheless, the free black population grew rapidly, so that by 1810, the Upper South contained nearly 100,000 free blacks who composed about 8% of the black population in the region and almost 60% of all free people of African descent. Thereafter, the tightening noose of slavery slowed the growth of the free black population, and the proportion of free black people residing in the region declined. Right. The free black population in the Upper South was a product of two patterns of manumission. The first and the most important occurred on a large scale. It was indiscriminate and rooted in ideological and economic changes of the Revolutionary era. The second, smaller and more selective, originated in personal relations between master and slave. The first wave of manumissions produced a population that, like the slave population, was largely rural and black in color, to the extent, however, that post-revolutionary emancipation was selective, with masters choosing whom they would to be free. It produces a free black population that was more skilled and lighter in color than that of the North. In the course of the 19th century, manumission became even more selective, so that free people of the Upper South became increasingly skilled in occupation, urban in residence, and light in skin color. The absence of large-scale European immigration to the slave states and a long-standing reliance on black labor allowed Upper South free blacks to enjoy a higher economic standing than those in the free states, meaning that whites stopped migrating in that area. Blacks was having babies. They growing by population. They building Black Wall Street. They moving, right? In 1860, a quarter to a third of free black men practiced skilled trades in Nashville, Richmond, and other Upper South cities. But if the presence of slavery helped elevate their economic status, it severely limited the free people's opportunities for political or communal activists. For Southern whites looked upon free black people as the chief inspiration and instigators of slave unrest. White Southerners not only prevented free black people from voting, sitting on juries, and testifying in court, but also barred them from traveling without permission and meeting without the supervision of some white notable. These constraints circumscribed political and organizational opportunities. No black newspapers were published and no black conventions met in the South. There were no Southern counterparts of Allen or Douglas. Black churches, schools, and fraternal societies were fragile organizations, often forced to meet clandestinely with limited opportunities for political outlets. Free black men and women poured their energies into economic opportunities and as tradesmen and artisans made considerable gains. These tendencies toward economic advancement at the expense of political activism was present in an even more exaggerated form in the Lower South, particularly the port cities of Charleston, Mobile, and New Orleans. These places were largely untouched by the egalitarian thrust of the Revolutionary era. Moreover, when the United States gained control of Louisiana and Florida, American officials decommissioned and dispersed the free black militias, and slaveholders' dominant legislature subjected the existing free black population to considerable restrictions. The free black population increased slowly in the 19th century. Its growth, the product of natural increase in sexual relations between master and slaves, almost all free blacks were drawn from the small group of privileged slaves who had lived in close contact with their owners, connections that often bespoke family ties. As a result, former slaves were overwhelmingly urban and light-skinned, a quality that earned them the title Free People of Color, or in New Orleans, gens de couleur, GENSDECOULEUR. Although comparatively few in numbers, most were far more skilled than free blacks in the Upper South. In some places, such as Charleston and New Orleans, over 3/4 of the free men of color practiced skilled crafts, and they monopolized some trades on the eve of the Civil War. A handful of wealthy free people of color even purchased slaves and moved into the planter class. As in the Upper South, the presence of slavery in the Lower South prevented free people of color from translating their higher economic standing into social and political gains. Denied suffrage and proscribed from office, they found a political voice only by acting through white patrons. Same thing today. Find a political voice by acting through white patrons. That's why I'm reading all of this, to show you all the similarities that took place in the 1700s, 1800s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, up until today. Their manumitors, their customs, and occasionally their fathers, their own organizations remain private, exclusive, and often shadowy, especially in comparison to the robust public institutions created by free black people in the North. Although some were well-traveled and highly educated, as much at home in Paris and Glasgow as in New Orleans and Charleston, they dared not attack slavery or racial inequality publicly. Many feared to identify with slaves in any fashion. Rather, they saw themselves and increasingly came to be seen by whites as a third caste, like the caste system, distinct from both free whites and enslaved blacks. With the general emancipation of 1863, free people of African descent carried their diverse histories into freedom. Although Civil War emancipation liquidated their special status, their collective experience continued to shape American race relations and African life. Right? So basically what they're saying is that, at one point, the children who was created by the slave master, right, had a standing, but after the Civil War, no more, right? After the Civil War, okay, here we go. After the Civil War, I'm gonna just go up a little bit more. I'm gonna read this. But after the Civil War, they just threw them into the society with everybody else and mixed in, and their that free that status that they had was no longer more, because once they in America, it became black is black, black is black, no matter the shade. But back post then, you had the free blacks. Then in some areas they they isolated the children that the slave master had with the slave, and then they started populating, and especially in Florida and Louisiana. And then they had themselves a society where they was growing and they was building and thriving in a sense, until after the Civil War. Then there was no need for a certain caste in America, so they just said, hey, if you got one drop melanin in your skin, you black, and you getting treated the same way, because white people did. Now this is my opinion. White men didn't want the burden of responsibility of dealing with the children that they had through the African woman or slave woman, because much of it came by way of rape. And then two, they didn't want to have to pay monies or take care of the children financially. So they just said, y'all, disperse, and hey, it is what it is, basically. Now look, check this out. The black militia played an even larger role in Spanish Louisiana. Now, this was Spanish Louisiana at the time than it had under the French. Spain gained control of the colony in 1763, right, as part of the settlement of the 7 Years' War, right? And so when Spain got over here, they saw black people, they were working together. But I'm going to continue reading this, though. Finding themselves surrounded by hostile French planters, Spanish authorities embraced free people of African descent as an ally against internal as well as external foes. Because you got to remember, when the Moors was coming to the Americas, and the Sundry Act was 1790. Later, 1790 was Sundry Act, Sundry Act. They told, the Moors was like, hey man, we walking around here, we free and black, we getting accosted by these white folks. They wrote to Morocco like, say man, what's going on? Morocco wrote back to America saying, hey man, if these Moors, Muslims in America, don't bother them, you treat them like you treat white citizens, basically. Okay, let's go. They recommissioned the Louisiana Free Black Militia, adopting the division between Pardo, which means light skin, and Moreno, dark skin. Pardo is Pardo. They adopted the division because there was a division between the Pardo, light skin, and Moreno, Moreno, dark skin units present elsewhere in Spanish America. Right, in Spanish America time. Officials clad the free black militiamen in striking uniforms and granted them fuero militar, FUEROMILITAR rights. thereby exempting the black militiamen from civil prosecution, certain taxes, and licensing fees. No mean privilege for free black men in a slave society. So it was already in 1763, the Spanish was already working up to the Sun-Dry Act of 1790 as far as privileges. I'm strictly talking about as far as privileges for black militiamen who was fighting in Spanish America at the time. Okay, get that straight. And I'm not trying to say that the Spanish helped create the Sun-Dry Act because you had free blacks or Moors in America who wasn't part of the Spanish military, who was getting harassed, and they was like, hey, but the thing about it was, if all black people was like, yeah, man, we all Moors, we fall up under the Sun-Dry Act, then they would have had to adhere to the rules and the treaty of the 1790 Sun-Dry Act, which is SUNDRY. Okay. The free black militia thrived under the Spanish rule, becoming an integral part of the colony's defense force. When not fighting foreign enemies, free black militiamen were employed to maintain the levees that protected New Orleans. Right? Free black militiamen in the 1700s protected the levees in New Orleans, and white folks was mad about that ever since. And what happened in Hurricane Katrina? The levees were broke. Some even said that they heard a bomb-like explosion. Okay, let me read that again. Free black militiamen were employed to maintain the levees that protected New Orleans and the great riverfront plantations. This is back in the 1700s. To fight fires in the city limits, and to hunt fugitive slaves. As the value of the free black militia to Spain increased, so did the size and status of the class from which the militia sprang. In 1803, when the Americans took control over Louisiana, the free black militia numbered over 500 men, right? The central role of the free black men in defense of colonial Florida and Louisiana allowed them to enlarge their numbers and improve their place within those colonies. Black militiamen employed their pay and bounties to secure the freedom of their families and a modest place in society that were otherwise hostile to free people of African descent. From their strategic position, they entered the artisan trade, frequently controlling many of the interstitial positions as shopkeepers, tradesmen, and market women, occasionally even as plantation overseers and midwives. In English seaboard colonies, white non-slaveholders served as soldiers and slave catchers and monopolized the middling occupations as artisans, tradesmen, and overseers. Free blacks, as a result, were confined to the most marginal social roles. They had few opportunities to advance themselves, accumulate property, gain respectable, and buy their loved ones out of bondage. Their status fell far below that enjoyed by free blacks in the Gulf region. Right. Wow, man. Wow. So basically what it's saying that after America took over, it got worse. It got worse. So that's why the young man, if you hear what I was saying earlier, Afro-Latino, Afro-Cuban, Afro this, because Spanish at the time in America was treating the black militia, free blacks, better. You know, once America took over, all hell broke loose. But you have to understand that there was some intermixing with the Spanish here in America, especially in the South. The American Revolution transformed the free black population, but because the revolution took a different course in different places and because of differences within the extent slave and free black populations, the reformation of black life moved in different directions in different parts of the new republic. Post-revolutionary free black life can best be understood from a regional perspective. During the antebellum years, because you got the movie Antebellum coming out, during the antebellum years, there were three distinctive groups of free blacks in the United States. One in the northern or free states, a second in the upper South, and a third in the lower South. Each had its own demographic, economic, social, and semantic characteristics. These differences in turn bred different relationships with whites and slaves and, most important, distinctive modes of social action. First, the revolution transformed the North from a slave to a free society, greatly enlarging its free black population. But slavery died hard in the North states, and the gradualist process by which northern courts and legislatures abolished slavery left some black people in bondage until the eve of the Civil War. Still, post-revolutionary emancipation ensured that eventually all northern blacks would be free, and by the first decade of the 19th century, the vast majority had emerged from slavery. To that number were added immigrants from the South, most of them fugitive slaves. In 1860, about 250,000 blacks, slightly less than half of the nation's free blacks, lived in the free states. But universal emancipation in the North did not transform the economic status or social standing of black people except perhaps for the worse. Before the revolution, northern slaves had been disproportionately urban in residence, black in color, and unskilled in occupation. Free blacks followed that pattern, becoming in fact more urban and unskilled during the antebellum years. As they increasingly migrated to cities and found themselves pushed out of artisan trades by European immigrants. The artisan trades was black folks first in America. Then when the European immigrants came in, they was like, well, we going to give this to our European brothers. They slowly pushing black folks on down the road, moving us out, pushing us down the road. Racism, police brutality, unfair, unjust treatment under the so-called law. Come on. Nevertheless, post-revolutionary emancipation allowed black people certain rights because the abolish of slavery freed northern... Wait, let me read that again. Right, because the abolishment of slavery freed northern whites from the fear of slave revolts. Okay. They saying so they abolished slavery, which made northern whites free because they was in fear of slave revolts coming while they was in bondage, coming to kill white folks. So that's another reason why they had to end slavery. Had to find a way. Look, we gonna free them physically, but we still got to keep these chains on their minds. We got to run the economic system. We got to create systemic racism. We got to keep passing this on down, and hopefully one day they don't rise up and wake up to what the hell is going on. They did not look upon every gathering of black people as the beginning of a revolution. They limited the political rights of free blacks, but they allowed them to travel freely, organize their own institutions, publish newspapers and petitions and protest. Black men, they do that today. You can protest. That's about it. Black men and women transformed these liberties into a powerful social and political tradition. African Church and School Fraternities, and I read that. And I read the social petition, travel freely, limit. Okay, yeah, so basically what this is actually saying is that black people have been fighting the good fight, as they say, since Europeans came to the Americas. Prior to that, life was good. But the question is, well, we know how they did it. Guns, bigger guns, put folk in slavery, separated. Knowledge was changed. Well, knowledge was lost. The communication amongst black people in America was lost. So it became survival of the fittest. It became, I gotta get mine. It became, hey man, I gotta protect. The unity was starting to erode, although we were unified in color, in melanin, because that was the badge to say, okay, anybody that's walking around with this melanin, I don't care if it's 1% or 1,000%, you gonna get the treatment, you know. But then Willie Litch came and said, you know what? Why don't you divide them by color and have them war against each other? You know, that'll tie them up for years while we rob, rape, and pillage and rule and rule the Americas. You know, give them something to fight about. You know, so I'm just saying, man, it's same old game. We still trying to find ways to identify ourselves. You know, it's coming. That's all I can say. We it's coming, man. We coming. Now some black people feel like this election is coming up, that Kamala Harris and Biden is the answer. You know, but hell, we said Barack was the answer. We said when Barack Obama become president of the United States, man, racism getting ready to end. There'll be no more police brutality. We can finally sing that old Negro spiritual and hold hands and we shall overcome. And the dream is now it's getting ready to be a reality. And it's like, wait a minute, we gotta bag up and rethink our own individual characters. We gotta say, who are we and what do we want as an individual? Then you got to tell yourself, what's the level of bullshit you going to take? You know, then you got to say, well, what's my purpose of even being born? What's my talent? Who am I? What is my knowledge of self? Or who am I? Have I even took time out to even study my damn self? And these some questions that got to be asked, but we're going to put it together right here on Verbal Pig Radio. We out.